This is quite interesting. Welcome, first of all, to those who are on, and I'm sure some other people will gradually come on during the first 5 or 10 minutes is what usually happens. But this is quite an interesting topic today, and one I think that makes us all think fundamentally about the nature of our politics, because politics is changing now in a very dramatic way, changing in a way that we haven't seen for over 100 years and 100 more years before that as well. We're in a situation where we're seeing either the growth of a multi-party system, or we're seeing a situation where new parties are taking over from the traditional parties that we've had for over 100 years. We don't know which is which, but what's going to be interesting is to see how we react to the changing circumstances that are happening. Because while politics is changing in that way, there is also the growth of the citizens' movement, where people are saying, we want to make decisions for ourselves, find our own solutions. And that raises conflicts with voter democracy and the party system. And that's what we're going to look at today. And we've got two people with us, Irenie Ekkeshis, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly, and Catriona Rawsthorne. And they are both involved in the citizens' movement in one way or the other. And Angela Michael, who's just come on, is going to interview both of those. And I'm so pleased someone else is doing the interviewing rather than me all the time. I think that's really refreshing, which is great. So let's start it. And let me hand over to you, Angela, and you can then begin with the interview of Irenie.
Sure. Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Francis, for trusting me to do the interviewing. And it's really, really good to be here and having this conversation with everybody. So I'm going to I think, start off with the interview with Irenie. So Irenie, if you're okay to, yep, you're off mute. Brilliant. Thank you. Right. Just a sec while I get my screen sorted. So do you want to just start off by talking to people a bit about what your work is and what it means to be a citizen, what that approach is and what that mindset is designed to replace?
Yeah, no worries. Good evening, everyone. It's really nice to be with local people. My work life and my living in Enfield life don't often come into contact with each other. So it was a real really lovely to be asked to come and meet you all and chat with you about our work at New Citizen Project. So I'm Irenie. I'm the co-founder of an organisation called New Citizen Project, which is part thinky. I don't want to call us a think tank. We're not a think tank, but part thinky and part doing stuff. And I guess our mission, the reason that we exist in the world, is to try and work with organisations to get them to think of people differently, to think of people as citizens who are capable, creative, motivated to shape the things that matter to them for the better, as opposed to passive consumers who don't really care and who put themselves and their short-term interests in front of everything else. So lots of the theory that we work with, I might just pop up a slide if that's all right, Angela, just to somebody might need to give me sharing access. And if not, I can just speak to
you there.
Thank you. I feel like I want you all to put in the chat where in Enfield you are.
We can do that. Do you want to start doing that, both?
Let's do that. I just want to know where you're all from. Can you see my screen? I can't see you anymore, which is weird.
We can't see your screen.
Sorry, I'm going to do that again. And I'm going to hope that this time it pops up the window where I can see you as well. Oh no, Zoom's changed.
Why don't you? Oh,
Oh, it's coming on now.
Here we go.
There we go.
That's it. That's what I wanted. So, as I say, we work with organisations to help them to think of people as citizens. And there's a theory that sits behind our work, which is all about shifting stories of self and stories of society. And we argue in our work, and you can read more about that on our website and stuff, but we argue that at any one time there's a kind of dominant story of the role of the individual in society. And then it's changed over time, over the 20th century and before, and that story of self and society kind of dominates the way that we structure our society, and the way that everything around our society is kind of designed. And that kind of story of self and society broadly over the last few hundred years has fallen into these three categories. So starting from the idea of people as subjects of the king, subjects of the state, and the role of individuals within that society might be to just be dependent on the powers that be, the people in charge, to have things done to them, to obey the structures and systems of the state, to receive the best possible society because they've been listening to the powers that be. And the role of institutions and organizations within that story is to kind of command the subjects to kind of do things. Coming out of the two world wars and into the kind of beginning of the 20th century, we start to see a new story emerge. And at that time, it's a really liberating shift, a changing story that's empowering people. And it's a really positive thing. It's this idea of the consumer. And for those of you that have come into contact with my co-founder, John Alexander's book, you'll have read some of this in a lot more detail. But there's a kind of birth and the arrival of this story, which comes, as I say, and it challenges that subject story, and the idea of the consumer is that you're, of course, independent of the state and its systems. Instead of having stuff done to you, you have stuff done for you. You're there to demand and to choose between options that are presented to you.
that's good.
And the role of institutions in that story is to serve you. And we've been living in this consumer story for quite some time now. We argue that it's been the dominant story that we've all been living inside, and it's also the way that we've structured many of our systems across the world. But if you look at where things are at for us as a world, we have some issues, some problems that have come from the story that we've created, this consumer story. So we have significant structural and difficulties and problems to do with, obviously, climate, the nature and biodiversity crisis, inequality, social isolation and loneliness. And many of these things have come from the consumer story telling us that, for example, we can have and consume all of the things that we want, and that's not going to have any kind of impact on the population, the globe, the planet. We can be atomized individuals staring into mobile phones as opposed to connecting with each other, and that story has kind of led us to this social isolation that some people are experiencing, and of course inequality. So our argument is that you can't solve these problems from the story that created them. So you can't solve the problems that were created by the consumer story. So this climate crisis, biodiversity loss, all of these things that I've talked about, from an idea that we are selfish, independent individuals that must act in our own self-interest. And actually we need a new story. And there's a new story that's bubbling and emerging, as Francis talked about. And in the time that we've been doing this work, the new story has started to really take a lot of hold and become more talked about and become more visible. And that's the citizen story, which obviously you'll see in the column on the right-hand side. And in the citizen story, what's the society that exists? Well, we are interdependent with each other, and we recognise that. Rather than having stuff done to us or for us, we do stuff together. We do stuff with each other. rather than obeying the state or demanding the state. Our role might be to participate and be creative and create. And the role of institutions and organisations within a citizen story might be to facilitate us to be our brilliant selves. So I know that that's quite sort of like, I don't know, high level, esoteric, like it's theory, but it really drives everything that we do. And we see these stories kind of interchangeably and dominating at different times. One of the things that we've observed during the kind of COVID pandemic, and then coming out of COVID, and obviously the rise of kind of the strongman leaders that we're seeing in some parts of the world and emerging in the UK as well, is this kind of desire to get back to that subject story, that there might be strong leaders or individuals that will fix and solve all our problems if we just put our faith in them, and we feel frightened that that's a dangerous and disempowering place for us to be, particularly when we have such intractable problems that we need everyone to chip in and help solve. So anyway, that's a little bit about the theory. And as I say, the work that we do is with and through organisations to get them to think in this way, and to think how you can shift from that consumer story into that citizen story, or indeed from the subject story into the citizen story, and what it means to involve people as citizens as opposed to serving them as consumers.
So, Irenie, we've not got a huge amount of time left, and I was just wondering if you could give us some examples of, where it works, how it works well, how, organizations or councils or other groups can kind of start to engage citizens in that kind of interconnected and collaborative approach to solving these huge problems that we face right now.
So we're really inspired to see, particularly in local authority world, in local government politics, the emergence of lots of different participatory processes. So you'll have come across and been familiar with lots of citizens' assemblies that have happened over the UK on climate, nature, on biodiversity loss, all of those things, and those have been commissioned by forward-thinking local authorities and their sustainability and net zero teams to think about how we might kind of take a collaborative effort towards addressing climate breakdown. You might have heard of participatory budgeting initiatives, where again local and sometimes national governments, indeed in other countries it's happening more than in the UK, are allocating a proportion of public funds to be decided on through a participatory process, where a random group of citizens is selected to then make decisions on how that money is allocated and spent. You'll have seen loads of brilliant community initiatives, and some of you will be part of those, from repair cafes to community rewilding of community and green spaces, to all sorts of the things that I'm sure you're excited about and want to do more in Enfield. But yeah, I think that the things about taking a citizen approach is how, and particularly for this session, you might work in partnership as council and citizens, rather than being in that kind of us and them relationship where the council delivers services, the citizens don't like them, complain about the council, and everything just goes on in this kind of negative cycle. What if we try and reframe our entire relationship as citizens who are interdependent with the council and act and do things together?
Yeah, I think we'll have to stop it there, Angela, because we've gone over our 10 minutes on that.
Yeah.
And maybe some of the other questions will come later, rather. After we do the next interview, we're opening it up for 20 minutes of discussion with the audience, and then Doug comes on, and then after him, another 20 minutes. So we've got Catriona here from Civic Square in Birmingham. And Angela, would you like to introduce her and ask your questions to her?
Hi, Catriona. It's really nice to have you here. Can I just ask everyone that's not being interviewed to put themselves on mute, because sometimes we get a bit of background noise. So Catriona, can you tell us a bit about Civic Square, because it's such an exciting project, and I don't think I can do it the justice that you can, but if you just give us a very brief introduction to what it is and how it starts to incorporate that citizen mindset into a local community?
Yeah, so thanks a lot for having me. And Irene, really nice to hear some of the framing around your work, which definitely chimes with a lot of what we're working towards and experiencing in Birmingham. So Civic Square is an organisation based in Ladywood, an inner city neighbourhood of Birmingham. And our work is really focused on how people in their places can be at the forefront of our own social, ecological, and climate transitions, and really thinking about the social and the civic and the physical infrastructure that we need across our homes, streets, and neighbourhoods to allow us to do that. And I've shared a presentation in the chat because I know we don't have time for lots of slides, but it feels kind of strange to talk about our work without the visuals of all the people and the lots of different activities that are happening that make it all possible. And to cut quite a long story short, Civic Square grew out of another organisation called Impact Hub Birmingham in the city, that was founded by a group of young Brummies who felt unrepresented by the city's leadership, that they didn't really have a say in the direction of where the city was going, whilst at the same time the same city leadership was celebrating the young and diverse communities of the city as being the kind of real value in the heart of the place. So they started organising and convening around the question of like, what does it mean to put people in the city at the forefront of grappling with the big systemic challenges around our visions, our hopes, dreams for the futures of the city. And Impact Hub grew into a movement, it grew into a physical space. And whilst it showed kind of the possibility of what's unlocked when you bring people together around their futures, around their visions, around their hopes, their dreams, but it also kind of made visible a lot of the structural barriers to why all of the energy, the momentum that's created around these spaces can't manifest beyond, or couldn't at the time manifest beyond these spaces. So Impact of Birmingham was growing, was becoming more and more successful. They were gaining more income from their business model, and every time the organization started to do better, the rent went up. And that story was on repeat repeatedly. So as the kind of young and creative communities of the city were generating more value, that value was being extracted to a landlord that wasn't even, in the city or in the UK actually. And that was a story that Indy Johar, one of the close collaborators at the time, had predicted on the first day of the hub. He'd said, the hub is going to fail, but you've got to do it anyway. And so it was through that story of learning and experiencing and seeing firsthand kind of how this was playing out. We knew, or the team knew, that it wasn't, just a one-off story. It was something that was much more structural. It was systemic. It was one example of how land in this country is being used as assets to extract wealth from communities. And so there was something deeper that needed to be designed and grappled with, which kind of paved the way for Civic Square in its current iteration. So yeah, in 2019, they closed Impact Hub and founded Civic Square, and kind of transitioned from the city scale down to the neighborhood scale. A scale that we saw was, big enough to be able to experience these big systemic challenges, but small enough to have agency and possibility to deeply grapple with them and start redesigning layers of land ownership, of stewardship, of finance, of how we start to account for value within our place. This was at the same time that, as Irene spoke to, the pandemic hit this globally from the IPCC about, the severity of the crises, the multiple crises that we're experiencing and facing. And so, that really sits at the core of Civic Square, and kind of, underpinning the the mission essentially, which is around the question of like, what does it mean for the climate transition and retrofit of our home streets and neighbourhoods to be designed, owned, and governed by the people who live there.
And it's interesting that you mentioned there that it was kind of clearly not going to work on a city-wide level. And so the decision was made to kind of bring it local. What can we learn from that as a group? Sort of, obviously, we're not set up in the same way, but what can we learn about the agency we have within the borough we live to start tackling the challenges that we want to tackle around, you know, community and climate?
Well, yeah, I think it's within our homes and our streets and our neighbourhoods that we really experience and feel the effects of these systems that aren't designed to meet our needs quite viscerally. And so there's a lot of power in like getting together, in understanding your hopes and dreams, understanding your shared experiences, your concerns, and then starting to learn and surface the existing skills and knowledge that exists within the community already. You know, and passions and what do you have, then who might you be connecting with where you want to bring additional skills or knowledge in. And I would really say that there's a lot of power in starting quite small and building the relationships and the social fabric and the foundations that actually enable us to relearn how to organize together, how to like move together, how to sit with our differences and not, you know, all have to agree on absolutely everything to move forward productively. Yeah, I think it all starts with really coming together.
And how do you do that at Civic Square? How do you bring the community together? Obviously, there's us within the forum and those, but then obviously there's a far wider community that we need to engage to be successful in that.
Yeah, I think context is very different. It is like essential to this, and it's looked like lots of different things over many years. And I'll share some links in the chat with the tools that we've used at different scales at different times of the organisation. I should say that in December 2024, we managed to purchase the freehold for a large industrial site in the neighbourhood that we've been organising around for the last 5 years. And so as a physical demonstrator, a lot of our organising and convening and bringing people together now is orientated towards the design and construction process of that. So one of a role that I've been like heavily involved in is around our site as a classroom layer of organising. So thinking about how the design and the ongoing construction process can itself be opened up to come together for imagination, for participation, for skills building. You know, so many different things are possible. So it's thinking about you know, what's needed, what can you do together, and then how can you do that in ways that's open, that invites people in, that has a role for everyone, really.
Okay,
And does
sort
that,
of,
oh, sorry, just one quick like question. I was just wondering whether you mentioned that kind of different approaches, like different attitudes. So is that approach helpful in engaging people who might have different opinions as well, that kind of openness?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need to focus on what's important here. And I think the story that Irenie spoke to is a really, really important one. And really finding our commonalities as opposed to our differences. I think, you know, in these times, one of the things that's having the biggest impact is that we've lost all our social spaces where we used to come together and be with people that have different opinions, that have different experiences. And so it's become more divisive. We've almost forgot how to sit with that, you know, human difference and yeah, in that way. So I think it's a really important part of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
okay,
That's so
yeah,
great.
yeah.
So sorry to like cut it, like we've got limited time as everyone knows. So we wanted to open it up for questions. There have been a couple of kind of questions and comments in the chat already. So Francis, do you think we should sort of look at those first or just ask people to do the hand raise emoji?
Yeah, can I say first, if you are going to ask a question, only do it if you put your camera on. Please put your camera on. I know Asani from Nigeria can't use his camera, but please, if you can't use your camera, put your question in the chat. Can you do that, Asani? And everyone else, please put their camera on if they're going to ask a question. So is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Or maybe we could start with some that was in the chat that you're picking up, Angela.
So, sorry, there's a question from David Newman. Sorry, David. I don't know what Einstein's ladder is. So I'm going to ask the question, but you might need to explain it a bit more. But the question is, how high up Einstein's ladder should the authorities go? I don't know if anyone knows what Einstein's ladder is.
I do know what Einstein's ladder is.
Thank you.
David, do you want to say more about that, or shall I do my explanation, my best explanation? Oh, we can't hear you, David.
Go ahead, Irene. Go ahead.
Oh, no. So Arnstein's ladder. So Sherry Arnstein wrote a famous paper in the 60s about participation, and it basically presents participation as a scale that starts from being done, having things done to you, and progresses all the way through to power sharing and co-production and citizens genuinely being kind of in the driving seat. So from to with to citizen power, kind of the top of the ladder. And I think, I don't know, David, your question is kind of how far up the ladder we should go. I think Civic Square, which I admire so much, and Imi is a kindred spirit and friend, so one of the founders there. I would definitely put Civic Square in that kind of community power box at the top of the ladder. But I guess one of our arguments is that is that participation across all of that scale is good. It is encouraged, and is something that organisations need to kind of grapple with and work with. So yes, of course, we'd love there to be genuine power sharing between citizens and institutions all of the time. And in fact, sometimes institutions getting out the way. We don't see the ladder of participation as kind of only being of value at the top. There's lots of the spread across all of it. I think that has value.
Yes.
Is there anyone else with their hands up? Do you want to pick another question from the chat then, Angela?
So there's a question from, is it Tony Roper, saying central government has progressively cut money given to communities, to local authorities. So how can we determine what we want to do? I think that's a really good question. And it's a really good question. I like if Kat, I think, wonder if you could answer that.
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise, but we've been doing a lot of work around working with the philanthropy sector to also for them to understand the role that they can play at this time in resourcing and creating possibilities for alternate futures and alternate systems that currently don't have the resource from existing institutions or the capacity that's needed to deliver on them. But yeah, I think I'm just going back to the question to check that I've covered it. But yeah, I think there's lots of different things that are needed. It's not just one answer. But specifically within our context, we've been doing a lot of work, and you can find that online for our Endowing the Future publication, working with partners like Dark Matter Labs on what the role of alternate funding from places like the philanthropic sector, where there's a lot of hoarded wealth that's kind of drip fed in small amounts of grants to communities, and we're asking what would it mean to resource the transition at the scale that's required and commensurate to the challenge and transformations that are needed at every scale, including those being demonstrated and led by neighbourhoods and communities up and down the UK that we're really lucky to work alongside in an ecosystem with as well. And just to give a shout out to a couple of those organisations, I think if you're unfamiliar with them, like We Can Make in Bristol, are really worth checking out. They're doing amazing work. Portland In Project and Stoke-on-Trent. There's so many places that you could name and mention where we're really seeing these futures and systemic transformations coming from the street level, the neighborhood scale, really intervening with the systems of housing, of planning, of land ownership, of built environment transition.
Thank you. Irenie, do you have any thoughts on that as well? Because obviously it speaks quite a lot to sort of almost a done to approach, sort of wondering, kind of thinking about that, the funding in that way. And is there a way that we can, as another way, and other ways that we can kind of get action without relying solely on local authority or government?
Yeah, I think so I was at a conference the day before yesterday on whether devolution can bridge the democratic deficit, and I argued that there's no point in devolving power to institutions. You need to devolve power to citizens. You need to put the power in the heart in the heart of the communities and citizens. I guess there's a thing about if there are people on the call that are from Enfield Council or other councils about this idea of what does it look like to genuinely come in behind people and projects as opposed to set an agenda, consult on it, and then move forward without that collaborative process. And I guess there's a role for citizens who live in this place to start to say that that's the relationship that we want to have. But as Civic Square so perfectly demonstrates, when the institutions and structures of the state aren't forthcoming in having that conversation, you just got to start anyway, and you got to start small, and that means we often talk about find the others, do a thing, like do what you feel is needed, and the infectious and energy that you'll distribute to other people who find out about what you're doing, and eventually the institutions of the state will overhear what you're doing and want to get in on it. So don't wait for permission. I would argue, don't wait for permission, just go for it. Find the projects and the people and the things that matter in this place, and try and solve them. And then if you're from the council or one of the institutions, then come and find out what these people are doing and try and sit and listen and learn and find out what they need and see what you can do to support and amplify those things as well.
Really, there's a question that's come up from Sani. I know he's joining us from Nigeria and he can't use his camera, but it's quite interesting. He said, how do you raise policy ambition via greening finance and financing green? Yeah, that's quite interesting because you and Catriona, I think, have a slightly different emphasis. You're always talking about working in partnership with the local authority if you can. And Catriona is saying we started with people who didn't trust the local authority, and you may have to do something different then. So I wonder if both of you could respond to that. Maybe first you, Irenie.
So I absolutely agree with Kat. Like, what I'm trying to say is that there are that we argue that there's still value in working with the institutions to try and change them. That's what we exist to do. But we also 100% support, encourage, and amplify the people that are just going out and doing stuff and then trying to show local authorities and the people that work with them and the people that are elected representatives within them of the possibility of what happens when you get behind citizens. So I'm not an expert on greening finance, so I'm not sure I can speak to that in particular. But I don't know, Kat, maybe you can.
That's okay. Kat, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Irene, as well, that like it's not about one approach, it's about like the many approaches happening all at the same time across all of different scales that are needed at this time. And I think holding that plurality and the many roles that are needed within that is really central to the work that's ahead. I think it's really important that we avoid othering. We can't afford to other. We need to find our solidarities, and sometimes that looks like working with the system, and sometimes that looks like working outside of the system to show and to design and to create the capacity that currently doesn't exist within the system. And so, you know, we currently don't work particularly closely with our local authority, because we believe it's our kind of responsibility as a demonstrator to design systems rooted in a different economic paradigm that currently, you know, is restricted within government, because we're seeing narratives of growth, growth, growth driving the political agenda. And when it comes to green financing, I think it's a really interesting one. Like, we're amidst a climate emergency and climate breakdown. Like, what's considered green is fascinating now, right? And what's going to be considered as we experience the visceral impacts of the times that we're living in getting more and more and more intensified. Like, our 3-degree neighborhoods research, which I've shared a link to in the chat, talks about the real climate risks that we'll be facing, like, not too far into the distance. We're talking the next 10 years, we're talking the next 50 years, we're talking the next 100 years for real societal disruption, from the impact on our food baskets to our global supply chains to our you know, extreme weather that we're already experiencing all across the country, from flooding to extreme droughts. Like, the sustainability doesn't just respond or speak to one aspect of our life, it's literally everything. You know, there is no human health without planetary health, and I think that's the entanglement that we need to be grappling with, and it is revealing itself. I think, again, to reference Indigo, talks about it as like the re-entanglement, like the planetary re-entanglement. We're seeing the effects of that. So I think how green finance is currently organized will rapidly be reorganized, forcibly, if not voluntarily, through different means and different outcomes. And so I think that's a really interesting one. And in our work, you know, we're organizing to build the models and to show the proofs of possibility. So when there are disruptions to the system, there are examples of good practice that are more regenerative, that are rooted in care, that for the human and more than human life, that mean we don't just kind of turn away to authoritarianism and say, oh, there was nothing else, we didn't know what to do. And so over the long term, we absolutely hope that the tools, the models, the approaches that we're learning about through our work can be applied and accessible to every home, street, and neighborhood in different ways, you know, rooted in that context. That's not our work to do. But yeah.
I mean, one thing Sally Gornall has asked John Pryor, actually, who mentioned in the chat Enfield 500, which is about getting citizens together to work with the council. And she wanted to know a bit more about that. John, are you there online? Could you tell us a bit more about Enfield 500? John, I
Yes.
see you.
Hi. Sorry, I was just when we were talking about the council and people and the way sort of citizens work together with others, I thought it was quite interesting, because I joined Enfield 500 about this time last year, actually, when we had about 250 people involved. We've now got over 500, so there we are. But basically, there's a whole link on it on the Enfield website under get involved. Yeah, I saw it's also mentioned on newsletters. So if you get Enfield's newsletters, certainly one or two of them do actually have highlighted the work that we do. I think it's residents and the council working together to discuss policies, talk about things that maybe residents might want to know about in more detail.
When you say working together, John, how does that happen? Who comes from the council? Who comes from the citizens? And what's the format like?
Well, I think the council team are working Everton Green up on the second floor. Sorry, they actually organise the whole get together. We often meet in person. We also have online groups as well, to do with grounds maintenance, housing issues, tenancy issues, things about usually those that were people work in flats or live in on an estate. So I mean, as I don't personally live on the estate, I just joined it to see what they would they offer any advice to people. They certainly do. I have sort of noticed that they send out teams of people around the borough to support others in issues mainly on housing estates, but and anything issues regarding grounds maintenance, the caretaking sort of issues. Yeah, I mean, I think to say I kind of joined it as an outlier a little bit, I suppose, really. But I found the year quite interesting, and I've certainly been at meetings in the office as well as been online. So, and they cover different areas, different topics. There's groups covering different topics of information. You could join in. You don't have to join in. You could just sit on the side and see some information. That they send a newsletter out. That came out recently, the latest newsletter. So yeah, they're hoping. I think they reached the 500. They're still keen on getting more people involved. So yeah, if anyone wants to look at it on the website, it's under Get Involved, which comes out under the council housing area. Yeah, I'm sure they'd be happy to see anyone who wants to get involved in what they're doing at the moment. So it's quite interesting. I haven't really got everything about it, but yeah, it's quite good to follow. So.
Okay, John. That's a good explanation. So, I think you put some other information on the chat. Some other people have put comments on, and we don't have to go through them all now because we've come to the end of this session. But please put it up in chat. David Newman mentioned that there are some local authorities now using what he calls the donut method, donut economics, to look at local governance. We'll talk a bit about that at the end of this meeting, because our next forum in January looks at Kate Raworth's donut economics, how it can apply locally to create sustainability. But we'll talk a bit about that later. Anyhow, we're going to go on to
Irene wanted to say something. Sorry to butt in.
Okay, Irene, go ahead.
Not at all. I was just going to respond to the Enfield 500 thing and say, I think that's a really good and positive intervention. My worry about things like that is that they're still very much in that consultative frame. So what do you want, and then we'll deliver it. And that's still very much in that consumer model of, tell us, consumers will demand, and then the council will deliver. The council's responsible, and the council's the service provider. I think if there's an opportunity to shape that into creating more upstream, idea generation and thinking about how the citizens and the council can co-produce, or how the citizens might want to do something and the council can get behind them. I think that's where you can start to really shift things. So it's to say yes, and not to criticize that Enfield 500. It sounds good and interesting, but
okay. Well,
yeah.
Maybe we can take that a bit up with Doug, because we're going on to him now. So let's talk to Doug. You're there, aren't you, Doug?
I am indeed.
Yeah. Okay, great. Doug is joining us. Doug is a councillor in London Borough of Enfield. He used to be leader of the council at one point, and he's now a councillor for Palmer's Green. And Doug is one of the more inclusive of councillors, actually. He works very closely with his community and believes in, neighbourhood activity. So it's quite appropriate, really, to ask him some of these questions. So welcome, Doug. And maybe if I could start by asking you, you've just listened to the two speakers we've had now, who've given examples and some theory about organising for themselves in local communities, a bit like the cooperative movement did in the 19th century when the co-op movement started. How important do you think this is for communities to look at how they can organise and at times deliver for themselves?
Perhaps I could just start off, Francis, by making clear I'm here as a local authority councillor, but I'm not representing the council, nor in that respect, not representing the Labour Party. I'm a Labour councillor. I'm representing my personal views about the way things should operate. And I think that's probably what you would prefer. I found the presentations interesting, and I also found them from people probably significantly more knowledgeable than I am about some of the aspects that can be used in the way that you organise within local communities. So I'm not going to suggest that I have any great knowledge beyond my own experience. Where I would probably draw a distinction in my thinking, if I might, Francis, it's that the political structures that exist in this country, both at a national level and a local level, are broadly similar to the political structures that exist in most of Western Europe. And they exist for a particular set of reasons that have been created. And I'm sure my colleagues who've spoken may challenge those basic assumptions. But they're based on the need for a democratic legitimacy, that people are elected, have a mandate, and can be held to account. So I guess where this rubs up against the issue of local empowerment is precisely around that legitimacy question. And my own view, and you kindly introduced me in this way, is that really there ought to be as much close connection and participation between the two parts, and they shouldn't be a competition. There should be a level of partnership. So when we talk about having things done to them, because of that accountability and because of the need for a body to provide strategic coordination and control significant resources, then you will inevitably get that question of how that can work. And I don't have the perfect answer, and I'm sure my colleagues who've spoken do believe that they've got something to teach me.
No.
I'm sure that's right.
I mean, you raised the interesting point of legitimacy. You know, what is the legitimate way in which decisions are taken? One of the problems we're finding that politicians are held, according to opinion polls, at an all-time low when it comes to trust. Only 9% trust members of Parliament, and only about double that councillors. Now, doesn't that raise questions that the legitimacy of the formal system is under threat, and that we do need to find other different forms of democracy to replace it?
I think it'd be an interesting question in a wider community. Clearly, the people who work inside any community group must trust it, or else they won't be part of it. But whether those groups would be trusted in a broader context, I think, is a particular interesting question to consider. If you look at trust and confidence in organisations in Western Europe, trust and confidence in large corporations have equally reduced over time, as trust and confidence may be in politicians. Although we don't recall, even predates me, that when the old House of Commons burnt down, people came out on the streets and cheered. So I wouldn't have a view that there's ever been a massive level of trust, but trust is easily squandered. And I think that politicians, whether at a local or national level, have to work to develop that trust with voters, citizens, residents, whatever we wish to title we wish to choose.
I mean, it's quite interesting that you said earlier you're coming on here as a person and not as a party or a council person. And in a way, when we have this new type of citizens' politics, don't we need councillors who will do that? Because a lot won't. They will say, and they've said to me, I can answer that. It's got to be the cabinet person responsible. They won't engage on a personal level out of fear or out of being told by the whips that's what they've got to do. The way you're, approaching this is the way all councillors should, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I can understand. I mean, I've been around so long. I mean, at one level, I don't care. I've been around a long time, and therefore I think I feel more comfortable about addressing issues as I see them. But also there is a question, and I think this would affect anybody in any organisation. Indeed, I mean, I was going to reflect back to Irene. I actually used to work for Which, the Britain's probably foremost consumer organisation. I don't absolutely recognise a characterisation of consumers within that middle tier. But I think you are and have a level of accountability to the organisations which you have been in party politics, which you've been elected from and represent to the community. So people, I think, naturally may feel a level of nervousness about talking. I think it's more that people may feel that nervousness rather than there being any sanctions against. So to me, I'm just saying it as I see it.
In a way, you've got two cultures working, haven't you? The citizens' approach, which is based upon developing consensus, and the party's political approach, which has been adversarial. I've had to delete two posts on our Facebook site, one from the leader of the Conservative Party and one from the leader of the Labour Party, because they were promoting in an adversarial way their own position against the other. How do you gel these two cultures? Political parties wanting to make a party political point, and citizens wanting to gain consensus.
Well, I think that in the political world, with political parties, that there has to be the development of a difference. Because if every political party said the same thing, there would be no difference. So what are the differences? Now, when I read politics at university many years ago, one of the political theorists talked about the definition of politics as the allocation of values. And therefore, what you should, and I think that's a pretty good thing to talk about. So therefore, the political parties should allocate values. And by that, I mean, we believe in this. That's our value. This is what we stand for. The way we work will be based on our values. And they will be different between the parties. Therefore, that creates a level of difference. And that manifests itself, obviously, in practical discussions around things, not just simply the theoretical level. So I think that's the way that probably manifests itself. There is obviously lots of examples in politics at a national and local level where there is consensus. So if you take it at a national level, for example, select committees, which are cross-party, and they often create critiques of the way that decisions are being made by ministers and secretaries of state. So I think consensus does work across parties, but when it comes to the big picture, I think parties will put their case out there, and that will be different.
In your case, you have taken initiatives, haven't you, to have a more citizens approach. I mean, you were a champion of neighbourhood budgets at one point. It never came to be, but that was something you believed in, wasn't it? I mean, what was the progress on that?
One of the things we did, and it still happens in the council, but we specifically talked about creating resident priority funds so that individuals could come forward with the sorts of projects that they would like to see funded. This could be one person coming up with an idea or several people coming up with an idea, but also through in the ward I used to represent in the east in Ponders End, through a Section 106 agreement on the Alma estate regeneration, the fund was set aside, which was administered on a body which was made up of tenants and council, and that was to determine what that money would be spent for on behalf of the people who lived in that area. So that was a co-production type. But I think where you can get, which is why I don't like the dichotomy between citizen and politician, is I think you can get a virtual circle of where you get the legitimacy, the accountability of the local authority through its councillors, and at the same time you get the energy, you get the local connection of the local citizens.
As we move on from councils thinking they're the focal point in control to being organisations that work in engagement through deliberative discussion with communities, rather than sitting at the top and the audience at the back, you have the format of here we are, the council, here are the citizens. How do you create a format where they're just there as one of equal?
Well, I think they're of equal the different sides of a coin, because I think going back to that accountability, that requirement, of course, you're thinking, local councils are governed by all sorts of regulations and rules that require you to behave in a particular way and be accountable in a particular way. And I think that's a strength of integration of the local state. And if you're talking about how that works with local people, of course, local people have the ability on a 4-yearly basis to decide they don't like the way that those people have behaved and can chuck them out and put somebody else in. And so, hey, that's the way that people can be held to account at a local level. In terms of an ongoing dialogue, I'm not certain how that dialogue, and it's because I get my mind open maybe by further discussion. I'm not certain how that dialogue works beyond the ability of people to talk to each other and understand each other. And at one level, I think that if there ever exists distrust between councillors and local groups, I'll use local groups as the aggregation of local citizens, it's often because people either don't understand where they're coming from or feel threatened by where they're coming from. And that can be a two-way process. So to me, how do you create that bridge of understanding?
Okay, well, let's open it up to other people now. Is there anyone who would like to respond to that? I wonder, Pat and Irene, do you want to react to what Doug has said in relationship to the work that you're doing? Irene?
I'm certainly not advocating for the replacement of representative democracy with something else. That's certainly not what I'm suggesting. But I am also suggesting that sticking your cross on your ballot paper once every 4 years and then walking away and just shrugging your shoulders is sufficient. I'm saying that we need more democracy in more places, more of the time, in order to have a functioning, thriving democracy that is more trusted. And so I agree with lots of the things that Doug has said. I also point to the amazing work that citizens panels, citizens assemblies, and other deliberative bodies have done in making institutions' decision making more robust, more reflective of the population's choices and desires in a more inclusive way. So citizens' assemblies and other deliberative processes are selected through a process called sortition, which means that it's a group of people that have been randomly selected to be representative of the entire population and therefore inclusive of all perspectives in a given population. And they can make very, very good decisions and they can enrich our democracy. It's not suggesting that they're a replacement for it, but they can enrich a course of action. So the City of Paris has got a standing body, which is a citizens assembly that advises the lawmakers of the City of Paris on a number of different issues, and has been doing that very successfully for quite some time.
That came out of the heat excess in 2003, didn't it? That was the first formation in Paris of that. In fact, do you want to respond as well?
Yeah, there was a lot to think about in that. And I just think it's important to not underestimate the power as well of citizens and communities to be able to handle large amounts of resources. I think when we're talking about particularly at the neighbourhood scale, and I think scale is really important when we're talking about the roles of different actors. But in terms of like who I feel is the most legitimate and accountable to their place when it comes to thinking about the future, thinking about the needs, I think, the people who live there and have lived there for a long time are perhaps more accountable, as we're seeing, than Institutions that are entrenched within economic thinking and economic ideas that purpose and don't understanding some of these stories and narratives and models that have underpinned a lot of how our local government plays out. Example where local authorities are bankrupt or have lost huge amounts of funding after decades of austerity and are having to sell off their assets, which to the highest bidder. And we're seeing the effects of that, particularly in neighbourhoods where we're seeing community purchase orders, we're seeing, citizens that have lived in their neighbourhoods for generations having to be moved or being forcibly moved out.
Okay, because I want to get some other people to come in as well while we're on. It's quite interesting, Irene, you mentioned the issue about, voting every 4 years and going away is not enough. And Asani has asked a question to Doug. He said, is there no provision for recall instead of waiting for 4 years?
Not that I'm aware of. That the systems set up to allow levels of continuation for stability. I may have missed it. There may be something because the democratic rules change from time to time in Parliament. But I don't believe there is the ability to do that unless everybody had been totally corrupt and had run off with the silver and there was a reason to set it aside. But no. But 4 years goes very quickly, I can tell you, from an administration point of view.
Hey, David Newman, you've got your hand up.
Yes. It isn't just deciding who to represent you, but how decisions are made in these different bodies. One thing I found when I was in Northern Ireland for 18 years, if you only have yes-no questions, it guarantees conflict. One of the things that these citizens panels do, but can be done simpler, is getting people to think, what are the 6 different ways we could solve this problem, and which would you prefer first, second, third, and so on? And we actually had Peter Emerson reinvented a system that's worked in Northern Ireland and Bosnia, whereby getting people to rank these options, you find where they're willing to compromise, which is actually something very, very hard to find out in Northern Ireland. And that bit is, so you're involving community, not just in selecting people, but actually getting involved in some of the details of setting and implementing policies.
I mean, I do want to respond to that because very often we elect a council and then we don't know what happens. We don't know how the decisions are made. We don't know how open and transparent it is. We don't know what the role of the officers are and what the role of the councillors are. And shouldn't we have a more open and transparent system where the decisions and the way that they're made are known to people so they can engage at different points in the decision-making process?
I don't think there is a perfection in democracy, but what you certainly have in local government is all of the decisions of significance, and you can define significance, but all of the very big decisions are made by the council in public with published documents, published reports, and all of the decisions made outside of the council, which are of significance, are made by the cabinet, which is in public and open with published reports, and individual portfolio decisions which occasionally cabinet members make our own reports, which are published. And the only bits that are not published are the commercially sensitive questions, which can be in a part 2, or matters of legal privilege. But generally, it's all in the open. Now, I know it's volumes and volumes of paper, which may put off people trawling through them, but all of the workings out of decisions are contained in the reports.
I remember a long time ago, I think it still exists, there was an organisation called the Plain Speaking English Project, where they were trying to get councils and governments to actually put their policy statements in a form that people could understand in much shorter. And I don't think they very much succeeded in doing that yet. But is there anyone? Yeah, go on.
I think there's double-edged sword to that. I mean, I'm very much for plain English reports, very much for that. But there are things where the requirements of how you address things and how you write things are set down in regulation, and how you report on things, and the need to ensure that you have considered the various possibilities, options, risks and rewards in the decisions have to be there for public view, so that it is possible to demonstrate how those decisions have been arrived, what's been considered. And if things go wrong and you haven't considered certain things because they're not contained within a report, then that really is a difficult thing to defend. But the transparency is in the volume in some respects, even though I agree with you that making things simple to understand for all of us is really very important.
Aurora, you've got your hand up.
Yes. I wanted to say thank you to Doug for coming to our meeting and for, putting his head, so to speak, above the parapet. Because, as far as my experience of, I've lived in Enfield for about 25, well, not about, exactly 15 years. And my experience is just as it's been described, as things being done to people or to to communities, rather than communities being able to participate in this decision-making process. So and often the decisions that are made are experienced, at least I'm talking about my local community, as the decisions are not according to the priorities of the people who live in the area. So as for the democracy of the 4 years elections, I mean, we have in Bowes a situation where we don't have councillors. They have disappeared. One of them is ill and hasn't been. None of the councillors have been active for 2 years. And even before they were active, a lot of people were saying, well, we write to our councillors and they never reply. And there are so like these are the sort of things that just sort of sap the legitimacy of the council and of the people that we elected to represent us. And this is a situation that just creates a lot of frustration and anger. I can see it from in this area in Bowes, that people just don't trust anything that the local government is saying.
So you have your hand up too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Pamela had put a point up in the chat that links quite closely to what Aurora was saying just now about people feeling unheard and feeling little opportunity to discuss local issues and issues that directly affect them.
Yeah, I mean, how do you react to that, Doug? Because there is a feeling that councillors don't engage. You know that we held a community hub in the mosque a little while ago, or 2 years ago, and it had 120 people there. You turned up, and no other councillor did. Most councillors like to go to their forums, which is usually full of the usual suspects, and it doesn't reach a wider community. How do we get councillors more involved in their community than they are at the moment?
Well, I mean, I know when I look at what the current leader of the council is doing, he's out meeting community organisations on a daily basis. So I know from just taking him as an example, I think he's a paragon of virtue in that respect. And I think he recognises, and he is the leader of the council and the leader of my group, he recognises the importance and significance of having a relationship with all sections of our community in Enfield, of which there are many. And I think that's to be commended. I think my experience of councillors generally is that they do a lot of work. They do a lot of individual casework and a lot of specific work. So I think that, that there is a commitment from people to do things on behalf of their communities. Now, I think, if I were to put the question slightly differently, I think there is an onus both on the councillors to look at what's going on, and also for the groups, if they want to talk to their councillors, to actually ask to talk to them. So, I'm happy to speak to any of the groups that operate within Palmer's Green, just being very parochial, which is my locus these days. And I'm sure that my colleagues in other wards do the same with their community. So I think there is an onus also on communities to say, look, well, we're not happy, we want to talk to you. Now, sometimes there will be a significant difference between what a council wants to achieve and has said it wants to achieve when it stood to be elected, whatever party, and then a group, a section, a number of residents who don't like what that is. But then you get that butting up of the democratic legitimacy by saying this is what we want to do, against another group who says we don't like that, so we don't want you to do that. So in those circumstances, if you can't reach an accommodation around it, and sometimes you can, then at the end of the day, the democratic legitimacy of being elected gives you sort of the upper hand. I don't like to use that term, but I will just make what I'm saying clear in that decision-making process.
Okay, we've sort of come to the end of this session now. So can I thank the three of speakers, Irene, Pat, and Doug. I mean, it's a great discussion that could go on, forever. So that's really great. We won't be having a forum in December because we'd be having it around about Christmas, and I don't think many people would turn up. We'll have our next forum in January. And in January, we're planning to look at how we can develop strategically at a local level, a local governance system, which allows communities to look at how we are progressing in not overstepping the mark, if you like, that endangers some of the critical areas that face us in the planet, like heat excess, like water acidification, like biodiversity and so on. And we're going to look at the donut economics way of doing that. Now, some cities are doing that. Oxford is doing it, Cornwall is doing it, Lincoln is thinking of progressing it. There are many cities in Europe that are doing it. But Ben is going to lead on that and answer the questions. Would you like to say something about that next forum then?
Sure. So the forum in January, we're going to have Ben Kellard from the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership talking about the current paradigm and the well-being economy that we need. Sorry, my daughter's about to interrupt me wonderfully. Can you just wait 1 second? Seriously, just wait. I'm talking to a lot of people. Thank you. Sorry. So he's going to come and talk and set that up, and then we're looking to have probably someone from Oxford Donut Action Lab talk about their work and the work that's going on in Lincolnshire, and sort of touch on the donut community canvas and what that might look like. It's a big job, but if we can get enough people to get on board, then we can do that. So that's what's going to happen in January.
Okay, so I think that'll be interesting because the donut model is something that was developed a while ago by someone called Kate Raworth in her book Donut Economics, and lots of countries now are looking at it as a way of seeing how we do not, in our social activities, transgress those barriers so that we make an unsustainable planet. And groups like Civic Square in Birmingham, as well as the ones we've mentioned, Oxford and Cornwall, are actually seeing how we can apply that principle to a local level. So we have a local governance system set up, which is community bottom-up based. So it should be, I think, an interesting event in January, and we'll get that information out to you as soon as we can. Okay, is there anyone who wants to raise any other question before we go?
Can I just say a few words by conclusion, Francis?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I found the discussion really interesting, and I've learnt a bit on things, and I'll have to give some consideration to it. But I just think that you ought to give councillors, and I'm not saying directly to you, Francis, but a fair crack of the whip, because I think that they try and do a good job, they try and be accountable, and I'm not making a party political decision here. They try and be accountable. They do surgeries, or most of them do surgeries. They try and make themselves available. And I just think that I would like to put the onus back on the citizen, and the citizen to articulate their demands in a clear way and recognise that they may have a set of aspirations and values that are not the same as the aspirations and values of the people they're talking to. But the importance, I think, is that everybody understands and tries to get to a position where you can trust the integrity of both sides and can get to the position of delivering the best outcomes for residents. Because I think that's what councillors want to do. And I'm sure that's what the people who are active in community groups aspire to achieve, the best outcome for the people that are working within them in a way that is different in terms of how it operates, but the aspirations should be similar.
I think that's an interesting point, and how people put their demands to councillors is, I think, the crucial question I think we'll work on and do again in forums in the future. And that's where citizens' assemblies and citizen juries and citizens' hubs become important, because they find a way of putting those demands in a way that seeks consensus and decisions not made behind closed doors, but are made openly with those citizens.
And if you look at social media, Francis, you will see that some of the demands made by some individuals are not what I would consider to be reasonable or reasonably.
Well, citizens' assemblies aren't social media. I mean, they're more deliberative format. But that's something we can debate and go on more and more, and I think that's great. Is there anybody else who wants to say anything about any topic before we go? Pamela, go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, I think we just have completely lost the art of talking together in a reasonable and polite way. We don't meet together with our neighbours and communities. And I think that's really sad, because you can't look, democracy is a crap system, but it is what we've got. And you can't expect councillors to take the rap for everything. It's up to, I agree, it's up to us to come together and discuss things in a sensible way. Maybe with a mediator, I don't know, but I just think we've lost the plot on democracy.
Okay, well, that's. Oh, do you want to say something, Evita?
Sorry. Hi. It was, honestly, I really loved all the discussions going on in here, and I'm taking so much away from it. But I did want to point out that in my local area, council is actually doing something quite positive, is Shaping Edmonton. And during Shaping Edmonton, there are lots of things, you know, like they've done lots of community engagement, and they engage with the schools as well. And for example, children from our local schools, they had an opportunity to have an input in how they're going to be shaping and redeveloping and redesigning the local park. But I do agree with lots of the things that you're saying as well, in terms of that it's our collaborative responsibility. We all have to work together. We can't just put it onto one aspect and then just say council or this or that or it has to be all of us, and then we have a role to play. And just one other thing that I wanted to mention is that in terms of excellent community example of working together, the Ashton Hayes village is a brilliant example where they're going carbon neutral, and you know that's an excellent study. That they've just now actually gone over 20 years together, and they do have, you know, they've done together as a collaboratively together with the council and the community, lots of amazing things in their village. But again, it's the scale, so it depends on the scale, and we're in London, so the scale is much larger than that. So, but yeah, sorry, I hope that was
that's okay. Thanks, Vita. We just met Vita recently, and she's agreed to join our core group, and she's very interested in, you know, our carbon footprint, carbon literacy, as well as the work we're doing with schools. So, you know, it's really great to have you involved, and I'm so pleased you came on tonight. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Is there anything else before we conclude? No? Okay, well, thanks, everyone. And Pamela, did you want to say one other thing?
Yeah, I was just going to big up the Wreath lectures this year with Rutger Brugman, talking about how we move towards a more reasonable way of doing things. So I'm enjoying them.
Okay, and I would then, for the recommendation, Irene works with John Alexander, and John Alexander has published a book called Citizens, and it really looks at the theory and the practice behind moving from a consumer society to a citizen-based society. And it's a very popular book, and I would recommend people to read that. So that's a plug for you, Irene, and the new Citizenship Project. Okay, everyone, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll finish this meeting now.
Thank you, Francis.
Look forward to seeing you in January.